that, a woman otherwise graceful, reportedly beautiful, industrious, hardworking, a little bit ahead of her time, could be victimized in those days. And not to say that they can't be victimized today, but could be victimized in those times, especially for things like this. These types of things were common in those ages. Even if formal charges weren't brought up against somebody, they could be used against someone to malign their character or to lower their standing in the community. And then the last key, surprisingly, following tragedy, I feel is triumph, because in the end, Grace went through a lot, but she proved herself to be a survivor. And the triumph of the fact is that she actually, to many people's surprise, outlived most of her accusers and lived to, at that time, what would be considered a very old age for a man or a woman, which was she lived to the age of 80.
Wow. Wow, that's a big story right there. So there are some interesting things that are coming across with this, right? So we've got an accused witch. We'll get into why she may have been accused here in a little bit. We've got an actual trial.
Yes.
We know that she survived, which meant that, well, she had to have survived the trial, and the trial was by dunking. We'll talk about that in just a second. But not only was she dunked once, she was dunked twice. People must have really thought she was a witch at this point because she didn't die. And we're going to talk about that, and we're going to talk about something interesting that happened in 2006 in order to restore her good name. As you can see, that triumph, and not only did she live longer, to add to your tea, but there is a twist at the end of this story. Maybe Grace came back. Who knows? Oh, she definitely got something she wanted out of all that. But that being the case, it's time to chit-chat about what we did this last weekend, man. You came into town this last weekend. We had a good time. We got our sponsor coming up today, and our sponsor is us. Our sponsor is the good old 2A, the Second Amendment. We got midterm elections and things like that coming up. This whole concept here is not to tell you who to vote for, but what to look for if you're voting. People that want to take away your rights, probably not a good person to vote for. Second Amendment, First Amendment, Fourth Amendment, Fifth Amendment issues, guys. Wow, these are big stuff. Freedom of speech and religion and protest and things like that. Freedom to carry a firearm and protect yourself in public as well as in private in your home. Freedom against undue searches and seizures without proper government warrants and approval by a body that's supposed to be impartial. The freedom to be free in your person and your possessions, and the freedom to have a fair trial, hold your voice so that you don't have to incriminate yourself, and many others are things that are at risk right now. This weekend, good old Riggs came up and we hit the town. Riggs, tell us a little bit about what we did.
Well, we went around, saw some of the favorite sites, enjoyed some delicious pizza. What was that place called? Gino's?
Ah, man, I love Gino's Pizza. Gino's Pizza out on General Booth Boulevard.
And I never had it before, and your recommendation was on point. It was awesome.
Right across from Red Wing Park, yeah, by Big Woody's Grill.
Yeah, absolutely. We hit up A&T, a few other places, checked out, exercised some of those rights you were talking about. Went around and did a little bit of shooting over there at the range at A&T. That was a good time.
Man, we had a great time. So usually whenever you come to town, what's the rule? What do we do? We have to buy a pistol. I've got to buy a pistol. You've got to buy something.
Usually.
Usually. This time I bought a pistol. Today, this time when you came into town, I chose to get something a little bit different. What are you thinking? I'm going to tell everybody about it. I got a revolver this time, but what kind of revolver did I pick up?
I believe it's the, I might have the pronunciation wrong, the Chiappa or the Chiappa Rhino.
Yeah, the Chiappa Rhino, 357 Magnum, beautiful pistol. Wood grips, 4-inch barrel. You guys can find them out there. Lots of fun to shoot. Do we have a public service announcement? Crickets.
Yeah.
Crickets. We have crickets. Riggs, do we have a public service announcement about the Chiappa Rhino?
Yes, when you shoot the Chiappa Rhino, make sure you don't go with the thumbs forward grip.
Yeah, that's a lot
Chiappa
with
Rhino.
Yeah, it's definitely a lot with any kind of pistol because of the fire, the pressure can escape from the cylinder gap. But the Chiappa Rhino fires from the bottom cylinder, the cylinder at the 6 o'clock position, not the top cylinder. I've fired plenty of revolvers over my day. My favorite being a 6-inch GP100 Ruger. I just love it. In fact, that soft shooting revolver right there in 357 Magnum is one of the ones that really made me enjoy shooting revolvers in the first place. And it looks cool. But yeah, so since it fires from the bottom cylinder, friends, I had a little bit of a different grip, and I found out with my thumb that it doesn't usually require a thumbnail anymore after you do it once. So one and done, change your grip, make sure that you tuck your thumbs. Easy enough, though. What do? Do we cry about it, or do we go back and finish shooting?
No, we went back and finished shooting.
Yeah. So we had a good time stomping all over Virginia Beach, Freedom, A&P. Well, actually, you said A&P. You got me thinking about it, but that's actually Superior Pawn and Guns.
Yeah.
Superior Pawn and Guns has bought a lot of firearm stores over and around. We really like Freedom, too. Beautiful ranges out there on Freedom and lots of selection. There's firearms all over the place, guys. Extend your 2A carry. We're an open carry state here in the Commonwealth. Use that right. Go buy a pistol. Have a good time. Get proper training. Shoot safely. And when it comes time to vote, look who's trying to take those away from you. So that's what I would say. Keep an eye on the 2A, my friends. And that's been that for right now. Any more? No? Okay.
No, I think there's a good tie in there with speaking about rights that we have, and America, constitutional rights guaranteed to us. Some of those rights Grace Sherwood didn't have. She had a set of rights afforded to her, but they were not the same, and they were not as broad as what we enjoy in America today when charges are levied against us. There was much more, a lot of hearsay evidence and fantastical things were allowed to be admitted into court, whereas today the standard of evidence would not even allow such a thing to happen. So it's very interesting. It's a neat tie into.
So let's talk about some of those fantastical things. We're moving back into the conversation about Grace Sherwood, the Witch of Pungo. Dunked twice, lived to tell the tale, outlived the majority of her accusers. And something twisted happens at the end of this. Twisted in a good way. Something fortuitous happens 300 years later about good old Grace. But what were some of the evidence held against her? We've talked about this concept that maybe she was a woman ahead of her time. She might just be seen as, strong and assertive today, right? But back in the day, she was a witch for these things. First of all, let's address some of them you talked about. She wore men's clothing. Why in the world would a woman in that time wear men's clothing?
Well, you see, the thing with Grace is that she was widowed. She was married to her husband, James, and he unfortunately passed away. After he passed away, she was left with land, a fairly large amount of land, some of which came from his side of the family, some from her side of the family. I may have that incorrect. However, either way, she had a bunch of land. So she had 3 sons, and with her 3 sons, they worked the farm. However, some of her sons were young at the time, so she worked the farm on her own a lot. And she also provided services as a midwife, and she was also a healer. So at that time, she would have used early plant-type medicine to try to heal the sick and help people. We didn't have all the things that we have nowadays.
Right, so she could very easily be perceived as a witch, right? If you're making potions, which are healing herbal things, right?
Yes.
So that could be one way. Guys, just a real quick question. I've been shown up here that it looks like the stream did not begin. Remember, this is actually a podcast. The behind the scenes and live interaction, live at lunch, is just a place to come and interact. I am sorry, for some reason, the first 15 minutes or 13 minutes of the show doesn't look like it hit the YouTube for some reason. I do not know why right now because we're live. I'll figure that out later. But we are recording, so you will be able to find this at Live at Lunch on all syndicated podcast platforms, Google, Spotify, YouTube, things like that, Podbean, Anchor. You can find us there. So if you want to listen to the first 15 minutes and you came by this and you're just seeing it now, nope, there was some kind of glitch. So check out the link below. Now, thanks for allowing me that, Riggs. We were talking about what she was doing. So she was a healer. She worked the land. She may have worn men's clothing because she was widowed and had to do less traditional concepts or chores or jobs or things than a woman may have been tasked with back in the day. She didn't have a husband anymore to work the field, so she had to work the field. Now, there were many pieces of garment, going back to that Nicholas Cresswell journal, the Diary of Nicholas Cresswell. He talks about what people wore. And women in the time period, and remember, this is some number of years, 50, 60 years later, women still were wearing multiple pieces in long dresses with a stocking that was like, not like you and I think today, more like a pantalone or something like that. And I'm not an expert. I'm just recanting what I remember. So you would wear some kind of trousered like pantalone, leg to leg, right? You would wear your stocking underneath that. You would wear your heeled shoe on your feet. Over top of that, you would have a slip or a petticoat or an undercoat. Under top of that, you would have your linen dress or thing, whatever fabric you might have, most of the time black or dark color, because it was easier to keep clean and wash. It's hard to bleach whites when you don't have a lot of bleach. And then over top of that, you might have an apron. So there's 6 layers of clothing. Oh, and by the way, it's a big dress. It's all... Is that something you'd want to wear to work in the field? I mean, that's what most farmers wear, right?
Yeah,
Where'd you go, Riggs?
She wore pants.
Oh, I completely understand. And that's the point that I'm getting at. The question that we're talking about is why did she wear? The first concern that people had with her and why she was a witch was that she didn't act like the woman of the day, right? So the point is that why'd she wear pants? Because who in their right mind would try to work the field day in and day out in the clothing I just talked about?
Yeah.
No.
Well, you and I would find that reasonable, but no one in her day would.
Except her.
They would.
Yeah.
They would not understand why wouldn't she just, go into her place, but they weren't dealing with the same circumstances that she was dealing with, having been an unfortunate widow.
So she's working the fields in men's clothing. She's talking about issues to farming and everything else with authority, like she understands it because she's done it. Wisdom is gained through experience, and knowledge is the beginning of wisdom, right? So she knows about it. She goes, she does it. She talks about it when she's down at the local general store or wherever she's getting her stuff around town. And then she starts getting into healing, like herbals, medicine, and remedies. That makes no sense, right? Why in the world would we look to nature to find out how to help us? We would do something else. What do you think?
I think those were controversial topics at the time.
Yeah, absolutely.
And when they were benefiting people probably had nothing to say.
Yeah.
But as soon as it became convenient, or your neighbor, you covet what your neighbor has, and you want that, that becomes an easy target for you to generate suspicion against someone that you have something against. So she became one of the few landowners that were women in Virginia at the time. There were very few women who actually had their own land. Because of that, I think people were trying to do like they did in Salem, where they were trying to seek some kind of financial gain in the form of getting her land.
Mm-hmm.
So a few interesting and unfortunate events happened. She, being a healer and a midwife, she had helped a woman deliver a child, and unfortunately, as was common in those times, child was born stillborn.
Yeah.
So her neighbor Elizabeth Hill accused her of causing her to miscarry. So that was the final one.
And let's not forget about that. I'm going to jump in here. Let's not forget, at the time, a large family was important to a large number of children was important to the success of a family, and it could be seen. It could be looked down upon, especially when women did not give birth, and not necessarily boys or girls, but definitely if they did not give birth. The impetus to give birth and the reason a birth did not go full term and result in a successful birth was often borne by ladies, often borne by the common civility of the time, the idea that this was a woman's issue and not necessarily just a medical issue, medical technology issue. So her neighbor, what was her name again? Elizabeth Hill. Elizabeth Hill may have attempted to skirt some blame for the birth of her child being, not successful. She may have been just trying to alleviate some blame too. So there's some cattiness going on here. Midwife comes, help,
Definitely.
baby's dead, and then it's not my fault. She's a witch, right? It's not my fault. I didn't do it. She did it.
Yes, and Elizabeth Hill accepted her help, knowing her history in the town. So she had been accused of witchcraft several times prior to this.
So there's a concept here that she is a witch. People are feeling this of her, but some of them are still seeking her help for one reason or another. When you say that she'd been accused of being a witch, were there any things that people were talking about? Not necessarily Elizabeth Hill, but like what were the reasons for her being a witch previously?
It was mostly accusational. So because of her, what we've already established, the way she dressed, the way she acted, the fact that she was spirited, all those things began to elicit suspicion, and the problems began to arise, especially after her husband passed away. But she, being a spirited woman, she didn't take things lying down at all. So whenever she was accused of witchcraft, she went to court, and she even countersued her accusers for slander.
Wow.
Now, I don't know I've read conflicting reports on whether or not she received any compensation in the form of monetary compensation for her suing. Some people said none of these went to anywhere. Some of my research said that one of the cases, the first one, she got some kind of monetary compensation when she was blamed for an animal, a pig, I believe, dying.
Because not only did she heal people, she was also a healer of animals, an early veterinarian, you might say. Yes or no?
I'm not sure on that. I can't speak to that 100% confidently.
Okay.
But what I did see was that she was sought as a healer and a midwife of people. And however, she became the scapegoat when one year she had a very bountiful harvest. And no one else around her really had that good of a harvest that year. So, of course, they said it must have been witchcraft, not her industry and working hard and tilling her fields and her sons assisting her. It must have been witchcraft was the way she got ahead. So she became, basically the scapegoat for everything.
Yeah.
Something bad happens. It's her. She's a witch. Blame her for everything. And they came after her, I believe, 5 times before the charges stuck. And one of the times, this is interesting. When she was accused, a woman testified in court that she became a black cat and attacked her in her bedroom. She appeared at the foot of her bed with a shadowy figure with the head of a goat with glowing red eyes. And then she attacked this woman, transformed herself into a black cat, and then escaped through a keyhole in the door. And this woman testified to this in court. I believe the woman's last name was Barnes.
So the interesting thing about that is, we're talking about a time where courts were still ruled in America by the crown. And the charge of witchcraft from the UK Parliament and their historical records and religion overview, they actually have it. You can go there. It's parliament.uk about living heritage witchcraft. It's interesting because they have the charter and all of the information still available today for records research purposes. But witchcraft is a perceived faculty to summon evil spirits and demons to do harms to others. And it was linked to a religious extent that the medieval church had powers to punish those that dabbled in magic and sorcery. And its priests were actually often able to exorcise those who had become possessed by malign spirits. And this whole charter that talks about that talks about the Witchcraft Act, which was passed in 1542 by Parliament, that defined witchcraft as a crime punishable by death. So by the time this particular trial in Virginia takes place, the Virginia colony in Pungo, and Grace Sherwood is going through all these things, they had almost 150 years of witch hunting, which was a formal court-declared act of accusing a witch. You had to identify them. There were several different things that had to be met, it looks like, in order to have a proper trial. But before that trial could happen, these criteria had to be met, which was known as the witch hunting criteria. And so this was part of the governing law that was in effect at the time that people living in the in Pungo in Virginia, the colony of Virginia at the time, would have been familiar with to some regard, because they would have been living under this concept of witches, witch hunting, looking for signs of the devil and looking for magical powers, right? In order to find witches. And interesting, the Magical Powers Act, which was passed in 1736, was actually repealed laws against witchcraft, and it was done several different times. It repealed this particular part in 1736. It repealed it in 1824, and then once again in 1951, and was finally completely removed in 2008. So these concepts of magical powers and witch hunting persisted since 1542 until finally abolished in 2008, although had gone out of favor for practice. So that's how long, when something gets stuck into government or in an authoritarian agency or in the minds of the people, it can really persist. And that's what she was dealing with, right? So you were saying that people said that she turned into a cat. Well, part of them is transmutation and metamorphosis. Okay.
Yeah.
So the person is directly making statements that she saw these things, which, at least to some degree, coordinate with this witchcraft act. You know what I mean? Interesting.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
So I was just thumbing through my notes, and I did see that she did use her herbs to heal animals, to your point earlier. So
yeah, I had read some stuff that she was healing animals and things too.
Yeah. So the neat part about that is that, she had the ability to do things that other people weren't doing. If this stuff worked, which we know, herbal remedies have a long-standing, proven track record,
right,
to a certain extent, that, she was doing good things for people, and they still came after her and slandered her good name just because she was different. And we see that that's a symptom of human nature, that transcends time, but her last accusation, where they finally got the court to convict her of witchcraft, was her trial was July 10th, 1706.
Yeah.
She was convicted of witchcraft, and that was when they ordered the trial by ducking.
Well, we're going to get into ducking in just a minute.
K-I-N-G, but
yeah, ducking. And we're going to talk about Witch Duck Road. We're going to get into that in just a minute. Before we get to there directly, there were a couple of other accounts. I want to stop you in your tracks because I want to keep people thinking about this. We're trying to set the stage. There was also a woman, I believe it was Elizabeth Hill, the midwife, also made claims that after her birth had been stillborn, that she awoke one night very shortly later and had a great weight on her chest, and she could not move, and it felt like she was being suffocated. And when she was able to open her eyes, which was the only thing that she could open and look up, well, she saw the visceral formation of Grace Sherwood sitting on her chest, right? And she was like looking at her all evil and everything else. Now, at some point after saying enough Hail Marys and everything else, or whatever she said, she was able to rest with the Lord to save her, and then the premonition that was upon her vanished into vapors. And that was a very important part into what brings her to trial for the ducking, which we'll talk about in a second. Interesting thing, though, that recount, that direction, actually has quite a bit of root in something people may experience today. And I know we didn't talk about this earlier, but right off the top of your head, does it sound like anything you've ever heard of, Riggs?
Yes. When our research with Mothman, there was a gentleman who said that Mothman appeared to him at the foot of his bed, and he felt this foreboding sense of pure evil.
Yeah.
And he said he began, he said he was a Bible-believing Christian, and he began to plead the blood of Jesus, and that the more he prayed, that entity of Mothman slowly, went away over time. So it's a similar type of thing.
Well, it's interesting to know. These are very much how people discuss night tremors or night terrors. And this is something which is a well-known fact, right? We can demonstrate it through sleep studies. You can induce it through sleep studies and alpha wave sleep and these different things. Night tremors or night terrors, I've experienced them, especially when I was younger. It's a part when your body begins to fall asleep and is releasing different hormones that help immobilize your body so that you don't sleepwalk. But you aren't completely asleep yet, and your lucid mind wakes up. But your actual body is still under the effects and does not release that immediate stimulant to reduce the effects of the hormones that kind of still your appendages, and you feel as if there's something holding you down and you cannot move. So this concept of these night terrors, these night tremors, is something that many people go through specifically after a traumatic event, like the loss of a baby, or under suggestion, or under a light sleep when something might rouse you as you just go to sleep, like a bump in the night, something along those lines that might pique your lucid or your conscious mind as you're falling into sleep. And then it takes a few seconds, up to 15 seconds, for your body to release enough hormone to kind of rest you from that grip. Now, this is a known, like we said, a known thing, just like with a Mothman. I didn't talk about night tremors there, night terrors there, but even here, my kids sometimes have night terrors when they're scared in the bed and they're, all that other stuff, and they can't move, and I hear it often. So when I was younger, I wondered about this concept, and here we are today. I think things like what was described just a moment ago by Elizabeth, by me recounting what Elizabeth said, very interesting correlation with night terrors or night tremors.
Yeah, sleep paralysis.
Sleep paralysis. There you go. Yeah. Sleep paralysis. I think that's the official name, right? Yeah.
Yes, I believe. That's definitely a possibility. I think a lot of these people, though, were, I think Grace became the boogeyman, essentially, of her day. Everything that ever happened could be attributed to that because people need something to blame. They need something to look at and say, this is why this happened. I think it helps us on a psychological level deal with things. And the people at that time didn't have nearly the amount of information we have available to us today to easily explain away things that to them were still quite mysterious and still part of something supernatural.
Well, Riggs, it's time to hit up that drop report. I got to tell you, it's coming up right now. And just when we return, we're going to talk about the trial and what it looked like. We're going to describe how it looked, how it felt, and what good old Grace must have been going through when she was getting ducked underwater. We're going to talk about Witch Duck Road and all those things coming up just after the drop report. Okay, friends, drop report. What are we doing here in Virginia Beach this weekend? Let me tell you, Dave & Buster's is going strong over at Lynn Haven Mall. So if you want to get out and have a good time, this is actually something, if you're just looking for something to kind of spice up what you do, maybe you've got a sweetheart and kids, Dave & Buster's is a great place. If you don't ever take into video games or something like that, they got skee ball, all kinds of other things. I enjoy taking my sweetheart there and my kids there. We have a great time. Dave & Buster's is fun. And when I go, I take a camera. I always get pictures with the neon lights and my kids playing, but also have a beer with my sweetie and try to win some tickets and get something, although they're one-armed bandits if you ask me. So Dave & Buster's, great place to go and have some fun. Let's also not forget, you can go down to the pier and fish, right? $2 to get on the pier, to have some fishing, or just take a walk on the pier. Actually, I believe it's $10 to fish. If you go underneath the pier, 15th Street, you have a good time looking around to see what's going on there. A walk on the beach is always fun. We know that the report's going to be pretty out there this weekend. It's going to be warm, 70s high, low 60s, a little bit gusty. So if you do hit out there at that time, make sure you bring something to go along with it. And as we talk about these types of interesting concepts, let's not forget the Edgar Cayce Center, the ARE, Library and Advanced Research Institute, or whatever it stands for. I always get that mixed up. Riggs, do you know what the ARE stands for?
Not off the top of my head.
Not off the top of your head. That's okay. Yeah. In any event, it's a great place. If you like this kind of stuff and you're into the counterculture, the healing crystals and stuff like that, and I'm not saying that I am, but I do love the garden at the ARE. They've got a great massage center and Reiki place over there. Not that I get into Reiki or massage, but people seem to like it. It's a beautiful campus. Got a library in there, gift shop, and it's a great place to go. If you ever want to just get to some nice spot and relax, their little reflection pond and pool is pretty cool. And that's down around 64th Street, I believe, in Virginia Beach on Atlantic. Yeah, something like that. It's a lot of fun. And finally, if you're looking for a place to have your next wedding or event, the Virginia Beach Entertainment and Events Venue is a great place to pick up and consider. Lots of fun over there. Call Rose. Go to VirginiaBeachWeddingCompany.com. Riggs, do we do enough? We need somebody else. Who you want to give a shout out to?
Well, I would like to just give a quick shout out to Walking with History. It's not a local thing, but it's a YouTube channel that I referenced in my research. Mm-hmm. And they've got a lot of really good historical videos. So if you're interested in about a 15 to 20 minute long segment, kind of give you the high points of something, they have got a really good channel over there that kind of covers that. And I watched a few videos on this and did some reading on the Witch of Pungo, and her videos was definitely one of the better ones. Again, that's Walking with History YouTube channel.
Really cool. And as always, if you want anything to do hot and lively down in Virginia Beach the weekend, Friday, Saturday, and sometimes Sunday, you can find it on the Virginia Beach Oceanfront Strip at Atlantic Avenue. Any place down there is good to be hopping and thumping. All right, now let's get back into that trial, the ducking trial. So our heroine, beautiful Grace Sherwood, and she was beautiful and tall, from what we understand, and sharp-spoken, and would have been a pistol to hang around, right? She probably would have been a really interesting person to know if back in the day you could know her and not be considered a warlock or something along with it, or a black cat, yeah, or a keyhole, or a vaporous apparition, or a healer, or a midwife. So all of these things she fits whenever someone needs her to fit that. And a landowner, a female landowner, it's now time for her to be judged by the righteous might of the English court in colonial America. How does that go, Riggs?
So she was tried and finally convicted, where the other time she was acquitted prior to this. She was convicted of witchcraft and
so let's say that again real quick. She had been accused of witchcraft several times in the past, for which she was able to fight in court and either become acquitted or have the charges dropped. And that was based off of whatever they made fit from the witchcraft laws that we talked about earlier. So she was used to being tried, or at least accused. Is that what you're telling us?
Yes, and she countersued for slander.
Okay, so not only had she stood up for herself and won in court, but when she did win, she would countersue in order to try to get her good name back. Gotcha. So now, what's different about this time, Riggs?
I believe because it was more than an animal. I think, this is my take, the emotions of the last charge in the situation with a miscarriage, the loss of a child. I believe that was enough finally that it stuck. The charges finally stuck because of what was in question. And the family needed some sort of redress, and they didn't care that it was at the expense of Grace because she was an outlier. Yeah. She was an outcasted person in society at that time.
We got it. So what did the trial look like?
Oh, they would have taken her to the courthouse, which was very far from where she was, which is not as simple as hopping in your car today and driving there. She would have had to have ridden a horse or a horse and buggy, carried her there, or walk. I don't know if she would have walked, but it was a long ways. And so she consistently had to go back and forth for all these prior trials as well. So she gets there, they get her in the courtroom, and the standards of evidence are just completely different for the time. She doesn't have a lot of the same rights that she would under the Constitution. So she would be, set for trial. I mean, there's a judge, there's the accuser, and the judge is the one deciding if she's guilty or innocent.
Right.
Of bewitching her neighbor, causing her neighbor to miscarry.
And that neighbor is actually Elizabeth Hill. It was her husband who formally brought charges against her in 1706 after the stillborn. His name was Luke, and he accused formally Grace of witchcraft, using the Witchcraft Act, which we talked about earlier, and stating those things. Elizabeth Hill stated that afterwards she saw the vaporous apparition sitting on her chest, and then other anecdotal evidence. That's anecdotal too, but for the day, whatever anecdotal evidence could have been presented as well. And it didn't require much, but what did require was an inspection of Elizabeth's body. if this was to be the case, a charge couldn't stand unverified. So you couldn't just accuse someone, right? You had to verify. So 12 women inspected Elizabeth's body and found evidence of witchcraft. Now, that could be anything from a freckle that wasn't there before, because everyone knows where all the freckles are, I guess. It could be anything. And so I haven't read necessarily what the evidence was found with those 12 women, and normally that evidence wouldn't be presented directly unless it was in a spot that could be easily verifiable by a man, because it would be considered like reducing the modesty of the lady, right? Yeah. So you got these 12 people that go and inspect a woman that don't say to share what they find, but you can speculate that they could have found whatever they needed to say that, yes, this apparition truly happened. Okay.
Well, the interesting part on that is they ended up, I think what happened was they tried to find some people to inspect her, and most of the women disagreed to do it. And then the one woman who actually came in and did physically inspect her was the woman, talk about a conflict of interest, who had originally accused her of coming into her room
as the cat.
Yeah, and then disappearing as a cat and attacking her in some form or whatever. And that was the woman, I can't remember her first name, but her last name was Barnes.
Wow.
And she was the one who said that she found the marks of Satan on Grace's body. And there's various accounts as to my research that I found that said what those marks were. Some were people speculated birthmarks. Some said that they were literally.
So for the viewers listening, imagine coming into the courthouse at Princess Anne County Courthouse, right? Because it's all Princess Anne County. You're in front. You expect to be able to defend yourself like you have earlier. These people that are in front of you, very much of the day, are still wearing the black robes, right? The courthouse is set up very much like a church, an early church, where the pulpit is raised multiple feet above. There's literally a bar where you cannot go forward, which is usually the place where anyone else that might be testifying, or where the chorus might sit, or the choir might sit, where you come before the bar to that spot where you stand on the left if you're the defendant, and the right if you are the prosecutor, right, because you're at the righteous right hand of God, according to the perspective of the viewer. And then you have these charges levied against you, and the judge is wearing the wig, which would be very much in fashion at the time, and he's also got the white purity lapels that come across, much like what you would consider a barrister today in England, and they still wear this traditional attire in court in England today. Although some of the some of the regulations are relaxed a little bit, but it's very prestigious. And there's a gavel being banged, and there are people filled out in the pews all in the back of the court, and there are hundreds of people surrounded outside, and you have lines of witnesses that want to have something to say, and there you are as Grace, standing in front of everyone to the left, the evil spot, the bad spot, the left, the accused, right, and have to defend your name, right? So that's what, it must have been swelteringly hot inside that courtroom. Dust and candles would have lit if it was dark. Lights of light would have come in through the windows. But man, to be a fly on the wall there, man, you'd learn something, right? It'd be insane. And then we have the trial that begins. And how do you think that would have gone? What would that have sounded like? We've got testimony, but really the record of all of this really just shows that the evidence was presented and Grace was found guilty.
Yeah, it was a setup. I had been trying to go after this woman for years, and the first attempt to accuse her of witchcraft was in 1697. So it's 1706 now. So you're looking at nearly almost a decade of accusations being strung out over this time period where they're just trying to get her full, she's got something they want. They're after her.
Well, it's
so they finally get her.
Yeah, go ahead.
I was saying they finally get her. And I believe that at this point, it wasn't going to result in, no matter what she did, no matter how good her defense was, no matter how good her counter evidence, they were going to find her guilty no matter what.
Well, it's interesting about that because we're talking about what was ordered and they find her guilty. And ducking was actually a way to determine guilt rather than having an actual evidence of guilt. Ducking was considered guilt. So not only in 1706 did Luke Hill formally accuse Sherwood, not only did she come in front of the court, right, which would have been Princess Anne County, but there was no verdict found directly, but it immediately went to the Attorney General of Virginia. The Attorney General of Virginia found no judgment at that time either. And finally, after all of this process back and forth several times as this is hitting a fever pitch, the authorities in Princess Anne County ordered that she be ducked in order to consider, let the holy purity of water determine her guilt. And that's where the ducking comes in. That's why the ducking was so very important in this particular instance, because guilt was not determined just based off of the accusations, right? So ducking was that, as in ducking, D-U-C-K-I-N-G, underwater. It seems to have several different spellings, but talk about ducking. Talk about what happened. And it was at the Lynn Haven River, guys. If you're in Virginia Beach, you know that river.
Yeah, and if you're interested in finding the spot, there are markers out there which can give you an approximation. So they took her out, rowed her out in a boat, 2 men rowed her out in a boat, tied her hands to her feet, essentially, or her fingers to her toes.
Yeah.
And the process would be they would push you underwater. The water is pure, so if it rejects you and you float, then you're a witch. If the water accepts you, then you're pure, and I guess you drowned.
Let's think of, so
darned if you do, darned if you don't.
Right.
Brother,
if you're pure, you sink because the water takes you. You drown. And if you are not pure, if you're evil, the water rejects you and you float. What if you can swim
anyway?
And then you're hung anyways? Yeah, because that. So let's make sure that's a point, viewers, listeners. Yes, so the water literally is determining your guilt at that point. The purity of the water is determining your guilt. That was the thought, and that was the test. If the water accepts you, then you drown, but you can drown, be dead, and have a Christian burial, and you were not a witch, and so your family and land can be inherited normally. If you are not drowned and you float, then the water rejects you. That is proof of being a witch, proof of having an evil, because you were rejected. The water's pushing you out of it. Then you get to be hanged by the neck until dead, and your family may or may not, depending on the laws of the area, be able to inherit your property, because you, of course, are a witch, and the government can seize it at that time. Interesting dilemma. What happened to Grace?
So Grace, she's a survivor. I got respect for this, man. She's a survivor. She's not going down without a fight. So they put her under the water and she sinks, but she unties herself and swims to the top.
Which they never expected that anyone.
No, they did not expect that.
Especially how many men? Men usually were not charged with the crime of witchcraft. Let's be realistic. There actually were a couple that were charged in lieu with the Salem witch trials in Massachusetts, but they were almost an abetting or under the influence of a witch, not as their own devices, right? So the charge of witchcraft is specifically for a woman, generally, and I guess it's used more in that instance. And women were not generally considered to know how to swim. That's a very unladylike thing to do, Get all wet, come out of the water, and then people can see your silhouette. It's a problem. So Grace knew how to swim.
Yeah.
Further proof that she was a get-it-done kind of gal. Going to go out there, work the fields, plow the fields, spank the mule, feed the mule, raise the chickens, birth the calf, help with midwife, find remedies, and swim. She probably fished too. So big problem. And so, wow, no one ever took into account that you could swim. Yeah. So she gets untied, and what happens?
They bring her back into the boat.
She swims up. She swims up. Oh,
they get her back in the boat.
I got something I got to say. Prior to the ducking, she cursed everyone. She did scream out.
I was getting there.
Oh, okay.
I was getting there.
All right.
So the second time they wrap a 13-pound Bible around her head, and they then duck her with a 13-pound Bible. And she discards the Bible and swims to shore. And according to legend, some of the things I read, they attempted to get her back in the boat, and she was muttering all kinds of things at them, and they just let her swim to shore. But before they ducked her, to your point, they said, she said, before the day is out, you will all get a worse ducking than I.
Yeah.
And as soon as she got to shore, storm clouds rolled in, and a torrential downpour reportedly came in a big storm, which probably didn't help her case much. However, people attribute this to the fact that she was a farmer and probably knew very well the signs to look for to know when the weather was about to turn or when rain was about to come. So they attribute it to that, not necessarily actual witchcraft, of course. So she swims to shore, and then she is found guilty via ducking, although she lives, and she goes to jail, and they put her in jail for 7 years next to the Windhaven Parish.
Before we get into the jail part, guys, I want to let you know too, right, that they tied this Bible around her head. That is an extraordinary expense in this time. To have a complete Bible, most likely illuminated, 13 pounds, paper was different. That is would be priceless today if you found something like that. Back then, it was an example of extravagant wealth, right? And most likely came from, families. Remember, she was a poor family, a poor farmer girl whose father had given, or I guess her husband's father had given them 50 acres of land at the time of their wedding, of their marriage, so they could have. And so they were landowners, and she became the widowed landowner of this land. And, although poor, because she had nobody to work it, and she had to really work it herself, there was money in the area because of the land and the pigs and the crops and all that stuff. So when they were trying to prove her guilt, they went through a gigantic expense with that Bible, and it didn't work. So that was proof to everyone on the shores of what is called Witch Duck Point and on the Windhaven River today, that Grace Sherwood was a witch. Now, they had some choices after this, and that's what you were getting into, Riggs. They had some choices. They could go and directly hang her right now, right? Because the ducking proved she was a witch. But hanging wasn't necessarily their only option. The Witchcraft Act just said that the judgment of being a witch was punishable by death, which meant that a court could choose a punishment up to and including death and get away with it, right? Because it was legal. It didn't necessarily mean that they had to. And for some reason, it seems like they didn't, right? So what was that?
I don't know the exact reason why they didn't, but I do believe that, I think the people in charge at the time what they didn't want to create a situation where people began to automatically accuse everyone of witchcraft in the town to take vengeance against those that they didn't like. So that, like what happened in Salem, Massachusetts, one of the popular theories is that they wanted to prevent a Salem, and they knew that if they hung her, that would then cause people to potentially start accusing all their rivals and all their opponents in town to the charge of witchcraft so that they could rid themselves of people they didn't like. And they didn't want that. The authorities in charge didn't want that, and they had a sense that might happen.
Now, for those of you listening that might like to actually read the documents that were produced by the court, you can actually go to the Virginia Museum of History and Culture at virginiahistory.org and just search Grace Sherwood. It will pop up, and you can actually download and read the original documents. They're scanned, and spellings are a little bit different, but it goes through the entire process, and it shows you with the actual handwriting of the court reporter what happened. And this is where we get a lot of this account. Remember, Salem had happened in 1692, multiple people dead, big problems and uprisings, so yeah. But they may have also been concerned about what sounded like a curse when she uttered that you'll get a worse dunking than I. So the people may have chosen not to kill her, to hang her, because they were scared. But what do you do with a witch at that point? So they put her in jail for 7 years, 8 years, something like that.
Well, she did what would have seemed like an impossible feat. And I can relate to that, her coming out of the water, swimming out of the water, not just floating to the top, or drowning underneath and then washing ashore later.
Right.
The fact that she actually swam, escaped her things, I've been blindfolded, put in a chair, ducked underwater, twisted upside down, and had to find my way out of what I was in at the time, underwater.
All right, Riggs, we'll leave you alone, badass.
Yeah. I know. All I'm saying is I know what it takes to get out of a situation like that. And she's doing it with, no training, no understanding, just sure willpower and will to live.
Yeah.
So she probably put a nail in her own coffin in the sense of the charge of witchcraft.
Yeah.
Simply by surviving that, because that's something that no one probably had done before or had been heard of.
Yeah. Well, that's true. So she spends 7 years in jail. While she's in jail, she's fed and clothed at least enough to survive. She's let out, convicted, a convicted witch. She lives in that community as a convicted witch, and then begins to see what? Who does she see? She sees her accusers die.
Yes, her accusers begin to pass away
from old age.
The real kick, right? One of the kickers is people come to see her while she's in jail to get advice. So she's giving people...
She's an oracle at this point.
Yeah, she's giving people advice on herbal medicine and things like that, and helping people. One of the quotes she said is, "I be not a witch, I be a healer." Yeah. And that was in one of her trials. I forget at what point when she was accused, she said that. So, this woman was one of the most maligned, women of her time. And she was maligned by other women and other men in her community.
Yeah.
I think because of jealousy.
Yeah.
Because she was, tall, forceful, attractive, knowledgeable, hardworking, industrious.
Yeah.
Or, had become reasonably wealthy off of her land.
Yeah. Well, we don't really have much to say about what happens, but she does get to go back to her land, right? So somehow she maintained ownership of it throughout all this, and lives to see all the people that accused her die, and she lives to be around the age of 80 before she passes, which is a very ripe old age for someone in this timeline. Not that people couldn't live that long, but usually you would succumb to the elements, the weather, infection, something. Like the Oregon Trail, you died of dysentery.
Yeah.
So there we were. We're going to wrap this segment up and get into the outro credits, guys, but there is a shining light to the story, and we've got a beautiful little piece of music to go along with this. So, after everything that Grace has been through, widowed, witched, ducked, helped people, tilled her own land and everything else, she's not out. She's convicted as a witch. Through the ducking, she goes to jail. She comes out, she outlives everyone, and then dies. She dies as a convicted witch. On July 10th, 2006, Governor Tim Kaine restored Grace Sherwood's good name 300 years to the day after the ducking. This means that he absolved her of a crime, took that entire thing and voided it, and she is now no longer a witch. So in the history books, we can look back and remember that Grace Sherwood was a healer, a woman of industry in her community that was years ahead of her time. What do you think, Riggs?
No, I agree with that. And I'm glad that she received her pardon.
Yeah.
And now there's a statue in front of a hospital in her honor. And it's a nice little landmark, a little piece of Virginia Beach lore you can go see. And it's definitely a story that's left its mark. I mean, Witch Duck Road in Virginia Beach is named after this whole event.
Yeah,
So,
Witch Duck Road, Harper's Ferry Road, the ferry that takes you across Lynnhaven River right past the point back in the day, right past the point of the ducking, which was called Witch Duck Point.
yes.
I mean, this was like a whole planned out thing, not just because of her, but, that's how the town did their planning.
Yes.
But my friends and family out there that are listening and having a good time, guess what? That is it. That is our show for today. Riggs, tell me what you think.
Oh, fantastic. One of the best ones so far. And I'm just glad you had me on.
Love it.
And I learned a lot. I learned a lot about the Witch of Pungo that I didn't know before.
Yeah. We don't know what's coming up next, guys. If you want to have your thoughts considered and your ideas for the next show, go ahead and leave them over on live at thelocal757.com. Send an email to live at thelocal757.com. Let us know what you'd like to hear us talk about. Remember, we are live every Wednesday at 1 p.m. We got about a 1-hour show during lunch. Listen while you eat. Interact with us online. If you'd like to have your music featured at the end of the video or the end of the podcast and your local band, we would love to support that. All you got to do is get in touch with us at live at thelocal757. Tell us a little bit about who you are, your band, what you do. Send us a clip so we can listen to it, and we'll get our producers in touch with you. Riggs is broadcasting live from somewhere else around the world in his mysterious cave. I don't know, like, are you ever at Dr. Madblood's? Where are you?
I wish I was a Dr. Madblood. And I'm not a badass. So I just do what I do, did what I did. But I'll tell you who is a badass. It's Grace Sherwood.
Grace Sherwood.
Grace Sherwood. She was a badass in her own right, in her own time.
I believe it.
That's for sure.
Cool girl. All right, my friends. I'm going to send you out on the nice, beautiful tones of Stay Right There. Peace.
I wanna stay right here, chilling with my friends for another